and go.
Hi, this is Derek at Boise Cylinder Head Services. Today we're going to be going over a Subaru single overhead cam rebuild. This is out of something like a 2008 Subaru Outback, the VVT cylinder heads. What we're going to do, we're going to start out doing a check and advise. We're going to look it all over, check out for common issues, and then do a vacuum check on the valves to see if that's a problem. And if it is a problem, we're going to tear it down for a rebuild. So one of the major things that we checked, I already took the rocker arm assemblies. They're over here in the cart that we have for them. Everything seems to be up to par. It has all the pieces. There's no marring on the cam contacts on the rockers, the rollers here. You know, sometimes you'll see a good groove in there. Not very common, but it happens. The tips of the adjusting screws aren't beaten up or worn down or anything. So these are in good shape, nothing to be concerned about with those. One of the common things that we do look for on these is slips guides on the exhaust side. I don't have a flashlight right handy. Let me grab one of those. So what we do to identify a slip guide is just look into the exhaust ports and see if one guide is higher than the other. I'm looking in there now and they all seem to be pretty consistent. So I don't think that's an issue we have with this cylinder head. Yeah, it's a little blurry. We'll check the other cylinder head. I mean, you can see the guides that you know, they're in there next to the valve, and as long as those are all the same height, then you should be fine. Wouldn't be concerned about slip guide issues if they're not slipped. The next thing I check is roll the cam over, make sure it's free and spinning. Which this one moves back and forth. There's no snags. That's pretty good. Ideal condition there. This one will do the same thing. Spin it around. Make sure there's no snags. A lot of times these things will spin a bearing or run out of oil, and it'll cause a lot of bearing cam damage where they'll just jam up and they won't rotate properly. The next thing I'll check is in between the intake valve and the spark plug. They tend to crack right here. Just a little line right across there. This one seems to be in pretty good shape. I don't see any little lines on this thing, and usually that's what I look for, is just a little line through all that little bit of carbon buildup. If there is that line, I'll get in there with a wire brush and clean it up and kind of confirm that it's there. But it always has some sort of evidence if there's a crack, whether it be really slight faint line that catches my eye or gives me the hint to clean it up a little further. But these two look in pretty good shape. So we're going to do a vacuum check with our vacuum gun here. This sucks all the air out of the combustion chamber here as far as the head's concerned. I'll plug the spark plug tube hole and we should get about 14 inch-pounds of vacuum. So we'll do that now. If we only get 10 out of our 15, that would warrant needing a valve job. If it's less than that, then definitely needs a valve job. Anything above about 12 is in all right condition. Anything below 15 though, I mean, is worn down, so just depends on your preference there. I mean, a lot of heads we get torn off, we recommend rebuilding them just to get them in like new condition, but some people want to run their car, you know, on a budget, so they don't always go that route. But anyways, we'll check these ones and go from there. We're getting about a, what was that, a 7.5, 8 maybe. So that one's not good. That's getting about the same. We might have some equipment failure. Let me grab our other gun. So this one goes up to about 18. If you look at the gauge, we'll do a controlled test here. So that changes it a little bit. I mean, if we get 18, that's ideal. Anything above about 14, 14 and a half should be good. So let's double check this thing again. Yeah, about 16 and a half, 17. That's all right. That's not a half bad result there. Definitely run just fine. That one's getting about a 15. Not ideal, but still good enough here. Let's check the other head. Yeah, we're getting a 16 there. This head might be in good enough shape to keep running, but yeah, that's getting about an 8. So 3 out of the 4 cylinders turned out all right. Sometimes there's a little bit of dirt and debris that might get held between the valve and the seat that could cause a false negative. Let's see, I'm going to get a hammer, a little bit of brake clean, carb cleaner, and I'll spray that in the port here. Tap on the valves to open them up and close them, flush that dirt and debris out. Do it on the exhaust side as well. That kind of just sprays out as you tap on it, and any dirt and debris that's held in there pretty well clears out. We'll do a final check here, see if we made any improvements. Getting about a 12 and a half or so. Still not ideal. I'd definitely recommend rebuilding it at least. I wouldn't recommend rebuilding one cylinder. So we're just going to tear down both these heads and rebuild both of them, get them up to like new conditions. What I'm going to do with first.
You can talk about what might be the issue with that.
So there could be some internal components on this that got worn down. Maybe this gauge got banged on a table. I'm not quite sure exactly. We'd have to pull it apart to really find out what the issue is. Maybe this adjusting screw right here got shifted, but something's definitely off. Having that low in numbers doesn't really give us the right result we want. Yeah, we'll have to tear that thing apart at some point and figure out what the deal is. But so our next move is we're going to tear into this cylinder head to tear down these 2 Subaru heads. They're out of a single overhead cam Subaru, well, out of a Subaru Outback 2008 with the single overhead cam, variable valve timing, VVT deals here. So we're just going to pull the springs first. Get the valves in the basket so we can get them cleaned up. We're going to pop this cap off and look at the cam bearing surface and kind of look over the whole thing and see what needs to be taken care of in this rebuild. So over here we got our machine where we take out our keepers, and we're going to do that now. Alright, so this just pushes down the retainer, and sometimes we have to tap on the valve. But yeah, always remember to put your safety equipment on. It's very important to have safety equipment. You don't want to poke your eye out. So alright, this thing here goes down and touches the retainer. This is the retainer. We got the keepers in there and then the valve stem in the center. There's a groove on the valve that the keepers lock into, and there's an angle on the keepers that lock this retainer against the keepers, against the valve, and holds everything in place. So this thing is going to come down and compress the spring down. Sometimes the valve will just dislodge there up by the keepers, which is ideal for taking it apart and makes it easy. Sometimes we'll have to tap on the valve head with a hammer to dislodge it from the retainer. We're just going to pop through these and take it all apart. That one we had to tap a little bit with the hammer, but they're not crazy worn out. Sometimes you really have to tap on it to break them free. Doesn't seem to be the case here. Tap, tap, pop it loose. Put all our keepers on a rag down here to keep from losing them all. It really sucks when you lose a keeper when you're going to put this thing back together, because there we go. That pushes the valve out. You can tap on it with a hammer. Just lightly tap on it. You wouldn't want to bend or break a valve. We lost a keeper down in the cam journal area. We'll have to get that out here in a minute. Alright, we got all the keepers dislodged from this head here. All the springs will just pop right out. Maybe some of the valves too. So the valves, over time they'll pound against the seat and they seal for 100, 150,000 miles or so. But as they do that, the seat contact widens out and it causes pits from the exhaust gas and the heat that's blowing by it. And over time it'll wear that out to the point where it won't seal. I don't know how well you can see that, but there's little pits and marks on the face of the valve. And I mean, that's pretty good amount of wear there. I mean, definitely seen worse, but that's probably like 100,000 on this car. Be my guess based off that. So we're gonna take these keepers, excuse me, the springs and the retainers off, toss those oily suckers in a basket. We'll pop the valves out as well. Good opportunity to see what 100,000 miles looks like on the valves. This one looks about the same. On this other cylinder head that we're about to take out, it had a vacuum issue on the front cylinder, and I imagine we'll be able to see why when we pull those valves out. The pitting might be a little more than these ones, or maybe a valve's bent or something like that. The intake valves, same kind of thing. They tend to hold up a heck of a lot better, and you can kind of see the ring where the seat has been contacting on those. There's no pits from extreme heat of the exhaust blowing by it. They stay a little cooler and wear a little bit less, so that's good. In good shape. Pull the other valves, take them out. We get a good chance to look at the seat here and see what's going on with them. Sometimes seats will pound in really dramatically where you can catch your edge on it and it's just completely wasted. It's not going to seal, that's for sure. Subarus, they tend to hold up pretty well. The turbos not so much, but these single overhead cams hold up fairly well. You can see the kind of pitting and holes on the seat here. That's the same kind of wear we were seeing on the exhaust valve. It happens on the seats too. But that's just wear over time. Nothing that will prevent us from rebuilding this head, that's for sure. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and whip this other one apart real quick on the machine, and then we'll take off the cam cap assembly. Alright, same thing, we're just going to pop all our springs in our basket, keep everything together. I mentioned how I lost a keeper in this head. I lost 2 of them on this one inside the cylinder head. We'll shake those out next. This is the cylinder that we were having those low vacuum numbers on. I'm going to look over the valve seat and see if there's any big signs of issues. There is kind of an edge here where you can feel on both sides of that seat where it's kind of got a carbon buildup. That could be part of the problem. It does look like there's some pitting and the whole thing's a little blackened. So we're probably just worn out beyond those other ones just a little bit, to the point where the seat to valve contact is kind of getting a rounded edge instead of a nice solid flat to flat surface. And that's going to cause some bad vacuum there. Usually, you know, the exhaust flames are going in here, and if it can blow by, it's going to burn that seat and make it weaker, and sometimes it'll burn a valve, which is, it'll like carve a hole into the side of it with the heat like a plasma cutter. Alright. We're also going to put all our valves in this basket, clean those up, glass bead the carbon up, and grind the valves to see if they're in good enough shape to rebuild. Next time, let's take a look at these seats as well. This is the problem cylinder right here. I don't see so much of an issue on this seat here, but this one you can definitely see some blackened areas, some pits. It's definitely not the worst ever, but that's definitely the issue we were seeing with the vacuum check gun in our last video. And that's something that we'll fix during the rebuild. I'm going to pull these valve stem seals off. They're a little crispy and hard. They should be pretty malleable rubber there. But I don't know if you can really see. If I poke this thing, it doesn't really move. It's hard. It's not quite crispy, but it's getting there. I mean, that's a good sign of something that's like 100,000 miles on it. You know, these things just wear down and go beyond their life. I mean, we sell blue Viton valve stem seals that hold up to a lot better heat and last a lot longer than these polyurethane valve stem seals that come with the factory head. But yeah, all right, we're gonna pull these valve stem seals off, pull the spring shim out from the bottom of the spring area, and then we can pull off this cap and take a look at the cam, see if there's any damage we couldn't see from our earlier pre-inspection. You know, while I'm doing this, I'm always looking out for any kind of broken off bits of aluminum, like if this chunk was snapped off or if anything else was snapped off, you know, the head could get condemned. Because if it doesn't have certain aspects to it, or crucial components, parts to it are broken off, then you're going to get it on the car and they're just going to not work. They're not going to hold the right bolts and pieces to make the car function. So just always keep your eye out for something like that. This is what the spring shim looks like. It protects the aluminum casting from the bottom of the spring as it moves up and down, and then also it holds this spring in place from shaking all about. That's what that bump is for, to kind of locate this spring in the center of the valve area, guide area. We're going to pull all those out. Then we can pull this cap off. It just takes a little tiny magnet to pull these things off. It doesn't take anything crazy. This is probably one of the weaker magnets we have at the shop, and it seems to do just fine. Sometimes when the oil hasn't been changed in them for long periods of time, it gets pretty gooey, nasty, and that'll lock those things in place. I'm going to go grab a couple tools here to zap these out, and then we'll pull that cap off. This takes a Torx bit, a TP40 that fits into these bolts here. There's 6 per head, and then a let's see, a 5mm Allen. Take off the 8 other bolts, and then just a 10mm socket. Take off these front 2. Take those front 2 off first. We'll use an air tool to pop out the Torx and the Allen bolts. Heavier duty. I think that air tool might be getting a little old. We've had it around for probably 10 years. Seen better days. Now on to the Allens. There's 8 of these. Pop all those out. I never did address those keepers that fell down. I did find 2 of them right here. There might be another one lost in here somewhere. We will hopefully find that last one. Now I'll just pull all these bolts and I'll stick them in a basket as well. We'll clean them up, get all the dirt and debris off of them. Alright, these things are sealed down pretty good. Sometimes we've seen oil leaks that'll happen, you know, off the side of the exhaust side in between that seam there. You can see a little blob of gasket that's squished out from the original seam. In situations like that, when we peel these off, we can take a look and kind of see what the issue was, if it had sufficient amount of gasket on it, or you know, what the issue was. Maybe it just wore out. But there's a good ledge right here. We can pop this cover off on. Right here and here gives us a good point to pry on. I try not to pry too much on the seal area because you wouldn't want to damage the aluminum beyond being able to seal when we're all said and done. This does look like Subaru original gasket, and that's not one of the problems we had, an oil leak before, but you can tell this thing is just crispy and breaks right apart. It's pretty old. Probably, like I said, about 100,000 miles or so, maybe a little more. There's also the other side here, gasket that's stuck on here. Usually comes off pretty easy when it's old and brittle. But we're going to take a look at the cam bearing surfaces, make sure there's no problems there. The cam seems to be all right. Looking at the bearing surface, it spins smoothly. So we'll pop that out, set it in the basket, clean that up later, and we get a chance to look at the bottom side of the bearings here, as well as the top casing of the bearing over here. Usually if you see a little bit of damage on the cam in a journal or one of the journals themselves, there's usually corresponding damage to the top and to the cam, all around pretty much. These ones look really nice. I don't see any signs of extreme wear or damage, so they'll be just fine. Let's go ahead and pop this other one apart. Imagine it should be in the same shape. The cam spins freely. There we go. Nice and clean and shiny. No damage or marks. Sometimes if bearing material shoots through the oil system here and gets up to the bearing, you'll have just rings all the way around on the bearing. You can usually scratch it with your finger and you'll just, you can hear it like scratching a bastard file or something, or a record. Cam looks good. There's no damage to the lobes. Everything looks pretty sharp. Pop that out, put it in our basket. Check this bearing surface. Everything looks good there as well. Another thing I'm going to check is the guide clearance. This is kind of a pre-check. We got a more thorough method to do this, but this kind of gives us an idea of how bad it is. We'll put an exhaust valve into one of the exhaust guides and then just wiggle it back and forth. I mean, there's a little tiny amount of wiggle there. It should have about 1,500 clearance from the valve stem to the guide inside diameter. And if it's like clunking back and forth like that when it's all the way in here, then we know we have an issue with the guide, and we're going to have to change that guide out before we can cut the seat, finish the repair. On these cylinder heads, though, we do know that the guides slip very commonly, especially when they overheat. The aluminum expands different than the cast iron guide, and it just loosens it up enough for one of those to slide out up towards the valve face here. And then the valve stem seal will pop off the back side. It'll just pop out and float there, and you'll start burning oil and all sorts of issues. So what our fix is for that is we got replacement guides for this thing. It's like 2/1000ths difference, oversized guide diameter, outside diameter. So we'll just change out all the exhaust guides on pretty much all the single overhead cams that we do. But that pretty well concludes our video on tearing down this cylinder head. We're gonna have to clean up all the parts, grind the valves, and move forward with the valve grinder to rebuild these heads. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. Go ahead and hit our subscribe button. Like it if you liked our video. Hit our bell notification button so you get all our notifications. And remember, it's all in your head. Working with our Burco SM1000M resurfacing machine. This is it right here, this white machine in front of you. This machine can cut cast iron or aluminum cylinder heads at a pretty quick rate. This is our Winfield fixture. This is an add-on to this machine, or something you can buy that makes life easier. It clamps onto your cylinder head here, and we'll show you later in the video about that. But this is the cutting head fixture. We can move it up and down, and underneath here you'll see a cutter similar to this one here. This is a carbide cutter for cast iron, and this is the cutting point right here. It is attached to a big disc right down here. Here's one of them right here. And this rotates around at an RPM of our choosing to get a finish that we want. But this thing rotates about 1900, somewhere between 1400 and 1900 RPMs is usually where we run it at. It just rotates around, and as it goes across the cylinder head surface, it shaves off little aluminum shavings like this and cleans it up so that the head gasket surface is nice and clean and flat for new head gasket to be installed with it. I'm going to spend a few minutes here just cleaning up and prepping our machine here. It's always very important to prep your machine before you use it, make sure everything's out of the way. Always use your safety glasses, especially with working with little shavings of metal like this. You wouldn't want something like that in your eye. That can get that can go pretty south. You have to go to a doctor visit, and that's just not pretty. Anyways, I'm going to take a moment here and clean this thing up, get her prepped and ready. Alrighty. Now that we have that pretty well cleaned up, especially our contact points, we want those nice and clean. We are going to resurface this DJ25 cylinder head Subaru. I got out of a Subaru Outback 2002 2.5 liter engine. So the first step is to put it into our windshield fixture holder right here. These have two solid plates on it that go on the head gasket surface, and then a clamp that clamps onto the bottom to force it against those two plates, and it pretty well levels it for us. Gets us in the ballpark at least. We'll double check it once it's in the machine. But once clamped up, we can take it over there and put it into the machine. And here we go. So these are hydraulic pins that we're going to use to touch the front and back of the cylinder head, and then we'll release this plate, check our level to make sure we're nice and flat. This will extend our pins out. We'll lock the ones we don't want to use. There's 5 pins per side here. We're going to use 2 on each side. We're going to have these underneath here on our flat surface here to raise the head up enough so that our machine will be able to mill it. Once we got our pins in position, I hold down here and clamp it tight with this handle on the side here. Once we know we're in there and clamped and it's solid, we'll remove this fixture here. There's a couple of chains that hang underneath it just in case something were to happen, it were to fall out. So we'll get those in place so they'll catch it if it does fall. Make sure our surface is clear, and then we'll check the level. It looks pretty accurate there. There's a little bit of warpage on the cylinder head from it being used in the past. That's what you're seeing there. The exhaust side is usually a little higher than the intake. And we'll check front to back. Does look like we're a little high on one side. So we'll have to clamp that piece back up and readjust it, make sure that we're nice and flat. Could be due to our pin placement, so we'll adjust that, shift it around a little bit and make sure it's going to work out. Okay. Something seems to be off. Let's start from scratch and restart it here. All right, that should do it. Righty, we may have had these pins overextended here. It caused us to be a little higher on this side. We've readjusted those and it looks to be flat right where we want it. All right, so next step, we'll drop the cutter down. Set our gauge to it here and take a few thousandths off the top.
Look at anything the same way. Gotta build up of my thoughts sitting in an ashtray. I'm sorry that I'm so inconvenient, okay. Just let me be me and I'll stay out of your way. I can see the way you look at me, I'm such a disgrace. I never really asked to be brought into this place. You wanna love me? Well then baby I have a taste. All the highs and the lows, no you'll never be the same. I don't really wanna hurt you but I can't control the pain. If you're sticking by my side, maybe we could be okay. Okay, maybe you could be the change I need today. I promise that I've never felt this way. I really hope that you will choose to stay through all the pain.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. Guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away. As you fade away. As you fade away. As you fade away.
now you can see that our head gas surface is cleaned up. Took about 2 thousandths off the top of that thing, which means it was not very worn out. We do have an RMI gauge or a UMI gauge that'll check the surface finish of that. Maybe we'll have to show that in another video. This one here, you can usually use your fingernail to check. The gauge that we have is a little more precise, but I know from doing this constantly that this is about 20 UMI, which is a little bit better than factory finish. Now we're just going to take it out of the machine here. The next step is to wash this thing out, blow out all the holes so we get all the dirt and debris out. And then we'll put in the valves. The valve stem seals, the springs, and reassemble this thing in our next video. Thank you for subscribing to all our videos, and if you haven't yet, there's a subscribe button down below. Go ahead and hit the bell notification too so you get all our notifications for new videos. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day. Hi, this is Derek from Boise Cylinder Head Services. Today we are continuing on with our Subaru single overhead cam rebuild job out of, say, like a 2008 Subaru Outback single overhead BBT cylinder heads. We're going to wash these parts up in our parts washer. I got a little bit of gasket to scrape off before we do that. But let's go ahead and come in the room here and I'll explain what we're doing. There's a little bit of gasket on here that we don't like getting into our glass bead machine, so I'm going to scrape that off real quick before we put it in the wash. And this is our washing machine here. It's an Axe Equipment parts washer, and it does a really nice job. Blasts a lot of hot chemical onto our parts, has the rotisseries in there. But yeah, so we're going to put the cylinder heads and the caps in the upper cabinet, and then the cams, rockers, and valves and springs into the lower trough here. That'll get everything cleaned up real nice for us. Prep it for the glass bead machine. So this is a carbide tool we got off Amazon. And we're going to use to scrape off the gasket real quick and simple. I want to be careful not to damage the surface. It could cause oil to leak out later on the rebuild when it's all said and done, if there was a good groove there. But alright, now we're going to put it in our washing machine. There's a lot of different jets in here. It sprays water from both sides, and from the top down and the bottom up, just to get every angle clean. We're going to turn this thing on and pop the other pieces in. Oh, let me get our caps in there too. All right, here we go. Hi, this is Derek from Boise Cylinder Head Services. Today we're continuing on with our single overhead cam Subaru build. We are going to be cutting the seats today on our Rottler SGF8. What we've done before this was pulled the heads apart, ground the valves, went through, checked the guides, cleaned them up, then glass beaded them. And then we installed new guides into the exhaust side because there's a pretty common slip guide issue with these heads. And now we've got them over to the Rottler SGF8, which we're going to mount it in there and cut it as the next step of this rebuild. So we're going to get started here. I just got to mount this head into this Rottler SGF8 seat and guide machine. Clamp it in, level it out, and then we can size up the cutter and then cut the seats. Oh, so we do these in batches, and I think we got about 15 head, probably 15, 20 heads going on right now that we're going to be rebuilding. And this seat and guide machine makes it way efficient for us to cut all these exhaust seats and intake seats one right after another. Always remember to wear your safety equipment when dealing with machinery. You have metal chips fly at you, and that's not safe. Get a piece of this in your eye, you're going to be disliking life. So I got this thing mounted in there. We got a carbide steel pilot that we use. It's really rigid and easy to break. We put that in the guide hole here, and then we can use this digital electronic level to verify that we're level. We got a little, that's our leveling numbers right there. We want to get as close to 0 as we can. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. I think 0.03 in either direction is where we feel comfortable at. I got it leveled that way, and we turn it to go front to back. It's a little bit off here, so I'm going to tap on the cylinder head just a little bit to adjust it. All right, we got it set that way. I'm going to check this way again just to make sure it didn't adjust it out too far. We're looking pretty good. And then we got to verify our machine is also level. It does look like it's off just a whisker. There we are. All righty, now that that's all locked in and tight, we got to set our cutter up for the exhaust valve here. So I put it in our little fixture here. That'll pinpoint where we want that seat, valve to seat contact. I just use that needle point right there to touch the valve where we want it. And then once that's set, I think that's going to be pretty sweet there. And once we get that where we want it, we can take this valve out, put our pilot in, and then we can set our cutter up. We got a about a 7-angle cutter here that's going to cut our seat profile on it. It's kind of rounded at the bottom there, and then we got our 30, our 45, and our 60, which is the standard angles. And then all this rounded is extra for airflow, and we just love this cutter. It gives us a nice finish. Perfect for continuing on with a port and polish job on certain heads. But anyway, so I'll put this on our fixture here, and we'll just drop that little needle right at the top of the 45. There. There we have it. That's right where we want it. Lock this cutter in. Put our pilot back into the cylinder head. We already know we're leveled. I'll put this in our fixture here, and then our fixture here. see. It just snaps into place. Everything's tight. Got to make sure we only have a certain amount of play here, so we got to make sure that this pilot falls underneath this cutter with enough room not to bind. I think that should do it. Make sure everything's tight, locked down, safety glasses are on. I go down and touch the seat just a little bit and set our little dial gauge up here that we can tell how much we're going to be cutting off this cylinder or off this seat. Got it right on 0 where it touches down, so I'm going to raise it up a little above that so we don't break our cutter, adjust our speeds, and here we go. We're going to cut our first seat. You can hear it cutting just a little bit there. We're just going to keep cutting until it cleans all the way up and we can see our 45 with a nice finish. I like to go till we see the little bit of 30-degree angle there so we know we got our full width of the 45, which I believe we do. We can slide this aside, pull up our pilot, get all that metal shavings off of it, and then to double check our valve contact, we're going to blow off a little bit of debris here and put a little dab of ink on here. And then drop that valve in there and we'll spin it around. That'll show us our seat contact, valve to seat contact. Spin that around. And you can see on the valve that little shade of red is our valve seat contact. It's we got a little bit of 30 on the top there. That's going to be pretty sweet. It's not going to change our stem height very much. So we're going to run through the other 3 here and finish cutting this, and then we're going to switch to the intake valve seats and cut those. We'll have to set our cutter up for the intake valve and re-level it for the intake side, and then just do the same thing we're doing now on the other side. So that thing's cutting at about probably 120 revolutions per second. And that leaves us with a pretty nice finish. And, you know, it cuts through the metal pretty quickly. And we just swap this pilot over. These little metal shavings here can get in your hands, cause a nasty sliver. But we're just going to move this pilot to the next one and cut the next seat. Let's see, there we go. Sometimes those metal shavings will jam up on the pilot. That's what happened here. We'll have to pop that out. There we go. Sweet. Just drop this down here. Get it leveled and centered. We're going to cut the next one. This process of using the seat and guide machine and that cutter makes life really easy, because we don't have to guess our width, you know, doing the older method of a grinding stone. We kind of just got to eyeball everything or use calipers to verify our seat width. And this makes it so that everything's consistent from seat to seat. And that's ideal for what we're doing when we're rebuilding, you know, 20 cylinder heads at once here. Gives us a reliable finish we can count on. Alrighty, that's our last exhaust seat. Now we can move over to the intake side. Gonna take our pilot out so we don't break it. These things are really expensive. And then we're gonna level it out to the other side here. Just loosen everything up, switch over to the intake side, get those pretty close to level. We'll pop our pilot back in. And we'll level this side up like we did the exhaust side. The intake seats take a little less wear, so they should cut out a little bit quicker and easier than the exhaust side did. They see a lot less heat due to all that cool air blowing by them. Let's see. Setting this one on 0 like we had the exhaust side. Checking this front to back here. Alrighty, looks pretty sweet. Now we just got to set up our cutter. Just want to get that little needle right there on the exhaust intake valve. All right, it's going to be perfect. Let's get that pilot. We'll set our cutter up the same as we did on the exhaust valve. Just going to loosen this thing up. This thing has about a 39 thousandths width for the valve seat contact area, which is pretty ideal for these Subaru heads. They don't require much. It's all about heat transference, wear, and longevity. You know, depending on where we set these seat contact areas will affect the flow and the heat transference, and thus affecting how long this thing is gonna run. Tighten that down, and then we're gonna cut our seat here. We've ground these seats here a little bit with the older technique, and it looks shiny and nice, but it's a little inconsistent, a little wide. So we're going to go in with this cutter and make them all even. Get it centered here. We'll drop it down and set our 0 for where we touch, so we know how much we're taking out. And then we're ready to cut. Verify everything's tight, safety glasses on. I'm going to lower the speed a little bit because the wider the valve, the faster the cut goes, and we don't want to wear down our cutters. And then just same thing here, we want to watch the 45 get cut into it. And then the 30 to verify we have the full length of our seat contact area. Alrighty. A little harder to tell when they're shined up, but we've changed the position of that 45 quite a bit. We're just going to double check our seat contact, doing the same thing with the ink and spinning the valve. It's a little lower on the intake valve than the exhaust. That'll give it a little more longevity on the seat and the valve contact. But now that we got that one, we're just going to move along and do the other 3. Just waiting for that 45 to clean up all the way across, then we're good. It's got a nice smooth finish. So I got caught our pilot a little bit there. And all these chunks of metal kind of get magnetized as they cut. All that energy in cutting it kind of magnetizes the little particles. So we got to blow that stuff off and keep it from jamming up our pilot. We got 2 left, and that'll conclude our seat cutting portion of this rebuild. Then we'll be on to resurface the cylinder head, wash it up, and then we can glue down the cap and reassemble the valves, springs, and keepers. Do a little bit of a vacuum check, and these will cut a little more there. Vacuum check to confirm all our valves are seated properly. And then we'll have a finished product. We'll have to put on the rocker arm assembly as well. All right, this is our final seat. There you have it. You got all 8 seats cut here. I'm gonna blow some debris off a little bit, give you a good look at this finished product here. As far as the seat grind is going, Subaru rebuild. That's a 2.5 liter out of like a Subaru Outback 2008. We've already installed the guides. Well, at first we disassembled it, cleaned it up, glass beaded it, put in new guides, cut the seats here, resurfaced the finish of the cylinder head. Then we brought it over here all nice and clean. And now we're going to assemble the valves into it, the valve stem seals, the little underspring shims, valves, retainers, and springs. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to start out by putting these little shims on there on each of the guides. This kind of holds the spring in place, doesn't give it much room to wiggle around. Also protects the aluminum from the pressure of the spring. Just got to put a little bit of oil on the ends of each of these guides here so that the valve stem seals will slide on nicely. Then we'll use this little valve stem seal installer tool to drive these on. This valve stem seal keeps everything nice and squared straight so that you don't tear the rubber on the valve stem seal. It'd be really ineffective if you tore the rubber on the valve stem seal. It's going to let oil through and into the combustion chamber, and you'll be burning oil. Anywho, slide those on first. Quick taps usually gets it. We'll verify that all these are straight once they're all in place. It usually turns out pretty good using this tool. Alrighty, they all look nice and straight. Now we can put a little oil on the valves and pop them into place. Got our 4 intake valves and 4 exhaust valves. The 4 exhaust valves. Then after this, we're going to set the springs and retainers in place, then take it over to our machine where we install all the keepers into the retainers and on the valves so that it'll hold these springs in place. These springs kind of have like a bit of a coil bind right here. It's a little tighter than up top. That's always at the bottom spring pad on these Subaru heads. So we'll put those all in the right direction. They also got a little bit of paint on them too, so that paint always faces up. All right, retainers. Then after we get these valves and springs and retainers all put together, we'll vacuum check the cylinders to make sure that the valves are sealing properly to their seats. All right, let's go over here. Over here on this machine, we can compress the spring down and put the keepers in place, just like we did when we tore it apart, just in reverse. These keepers can usually be pretty tricky to get in place. But let's see here. There we go. Then we release it. You can see there the keepers are holding the retainer against the valve and locking the valve in place. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. Like if you're on the car, there's tools to compress the spring down there so you can take the springs off, maybe change valve stem seals. This machine here, when you got the cylinder head off the car, makes it way easy in comparison to doing it on the car. And there is a certain height that these valve tips have to be protruding out of the head. It's called stem height. And that's something we verify when we're cutting the seats. If we go a significant amount cutting into the seats, we know that we need to either change the seat or be concerned about that area. These usually hold up pretty good and we don't have to address that issue much. Just turn it around. We're going to do the intake valves now. And these keepers here just have one groove on them. Goes in pretty easy. Some keepers out there are really difficult to get in place before you release the spring. But we've done a fair amount of these. We kind of got it down. Just drop them into place most of the time. Got a little poker here that helps me align them. There we go. This table that we got it on is air float system. So I got a little pedal down on the floor that lets me move the cylinder head with air pressure. The whole fixture actually. You can just bounce right down and do them all. So after this, we're going to take it over. I'm going to connect our vacuum check gun and we'll plug off the spark plug tube hole because that will seal the combustion chamber, that and the vacuum gun. Then we can check to see how much vacuum this is holding. I'll shut off our light here. This is our vacuum gun here. We use it on all our rebuilds just to confirm that there's nothing funky going on with the cylinder head valve to seat contact area. This is going up to about 18 inch-pounds of pressure there. We like to see it right about there. That 17 would be all right too. About as good as it gets right there. We're sealing pretty perfect seal. So with that, we got the valves installed, the valve stem seals installed, the springs, the valves, everything is ready for the next step. Today we're continuing on with our Subaru rebuild. This is a single overhead cam, 2.5 liter Subaru Head, left-hand head out of like a 2008 Subaru Outback. We have disassembled it, ground the valves, cleaned it all up, put in new guides, cut the seats, assembled the valves and springs and keepers, vacuum checked to make sure they're up to snuff. And now we're going to be installing the cam and the cam cap assembly along with these rocker arms here. And then we'll put a heat tab on it, look it all over, and this thing will be good to go. That's what we're doing today, so we'll continue on here. First, I'm going to take a little bit of oil off the caps just to make sure that there's good contact area for the gasket to sit. Any kind of fingerprints or grease marks we want off of there. Otherwise, it'll throw our gasket off and there'll be a leak all said and done. So I already did that to this side of the head. And now we're going to put on a little bit of grease. This is driven and engine assembly grease, driven racing oil. It's what we use on all our cam journals and bearings. Just want a little bit here, a little bit on the cap. So that you don't have to, the engine doesn't have to pump the oil there for it to be safe to start. Although we do recommend priming your engine regardless. Let's see, and then we got this cam plug that goes on the back of the cylinder head. We have had a lot of issues with the bearing, the cam plug area being warped over time, and if you put these things in dry, a lot of times they'll just pop right back out. So we put just a little bit of this Right Stuff gasket on there. I'll smear it on there with my finger, make sure it's a nice even coat, and then we'll wedge it into the spot here. I'll leave it out just a little bit because we got a tool that's gonna push that in. And actually, I should have put this cam in first, so we'll squeeze that thing in there. Reset that seal. And then we're going to use this fast gasket we get from Zepp on the cap assembly here. We're going to lay a nice bead of gasket right along the groove here. You'll kind of see as I'm going on both sides. And then we're going to squish the cap onto the assembly there. Want to have a nice even bead if you can. And make sure you get it on both sides here. If you mess this up, there's going to be a leak. You'll have to take the head off and clean off the gasket. It's kind of no fun. We've done a lot of these and had good success just running it along the corner of this groove here. Ooh, a little out of control there. Just paint it over. Now look at it, make sure everything's up to snuff. We got to go all the way off to the seal area here and all the way off the end to prevent any kind of oil leaks there. Now that we got it, we'll just set it in place and then we'll tighten it down. So give it a little tap, close that gap up. And then we got all our bolts set out over here. I've dropped a little bead of oil on it. But there's 6 of these torque bit bolts, 8mm. Just put them in their place. And then I'll drop these 4 Allen bolts, or 8 Allen bolts into their place as well. And then we got 2 10mm bolts that have a little strange valve cover washer seal on it. And this goes around the bolt, and it prevents any leaks from coming out of this hole. The bolt will seal it to the head and stop any kind of oil from coming out there. I've already put a little bit of oil on these threads, so they're all ready to install. We use an impact to get it down there. And then we will use a torque wrench to confirm that they're as tight as they need to be. It's the 6 torque bit bolts. Now we're going to do the Allen bolts. All 8 of those. And then the 2 10mm bolts there. I like to make sure that my cam still turns because sometimes it'll get locked up. Then we will use our torque wrench, snap-on torque wrench that we got here. It's a digital one. We're going to go 14 foot-pounds on the torque spits and 12 on the Allens and 12 on the 10mm at the front. I always try and work from the outside in, or from the inside out. Keep everything easy, even, and clamping down consistently. Six of those. Now the Allens. We do those 2 pounds lighter. Alrighty. Then our 10mm bolts at the front here. And once we got that, I check over our gasket seal, make sure it's nice and squished all the way around. Everything looks pretty sweet. There's a little bit of gasket that is in the seal area. We want to remove that. I usually just use a rag and a little tool that can get in there and wipe that clear. Alrighty, we got that. Then next I'm going to push in this cam plug. I have a little tool that sets it at the proper depth. Use a hammer to tap that into place. Keeps us nice and even and consistent. There you have it. Here's that, and then let's see what's next. We got the rocker arm assembly to put on next. This rocker arm assembly has a variable valve set up, and so we have to put in these little tiny components here, a little spring, cup, and piston. So I'm going to install those real quick. So the little spring goes into this portion. Little spring first. Little spring goes in there. This little cup piece. And then the you push that down. You put a solid piston. Oop. A solid piston piece in there. And then it's spring loaded. And there's one more that goes into this little hole here. Hang on just a sec. It's kind of tricky. It fights you a lot here. There, once you get that, You can set it up, and that's how it's supposed to be set up. I'll let you get a good look at that. You got the spring cup, the pistons, all in there. And there's 2 spots on this cam, one for each cylinder, so we got to do the same thing to this one over here. Spring goes in there, little cup, and the solid piston there. Let's see. Right in there. And goes there. Alrighty. Now those 2 set into place, so just adjust them so it's not going to bind on me when I put the rocker arm assembly down on it. Let's see. That's the intake side. This is the exhaust side. Got to put the exhaust side down first because the intake rocker arm assembly will get in the way. All right, now that we've got them in place, we're going to cinch them down and then tighten them with a torque wrench. These ones we put at 18 foot-pounds, so we'll set our torque wrench for that. After it pops on here, 18 foot-pounds. And then just all 8 of these need to be torqued to that. They've all been oiled up as well so that they don't creak or bind when you're torquing them down. There you have it. All right, then we take our coast flashlight and look over all the spots here, all the holes, all the gasket material, the retainers, the springs. We just kind of look over everything. I love this little light. We do have to set this little piece right here. This little piece hooks onto that. We have a little tool that we use to lock that in place. Everything looks pretty good. Let me grab that tool. We'll lock that down. Oh, shit, it's over here. So we just got a Allen wrench that we modified to fit these little things. And you can pull it back and drop it on in position so that it'll hold tension against that rocker arm assembly. Woo. All right, don't do that. That's why you wear your safe glasses for situations like that. There we go. Make sure it's in place. And then there you have it. Rocker arm assemblies are on. This thing's ready. We're finishing up our cylinder head rebuild on this 2008 Subaru Outback. We've done the full valve job, tore it down, refaced the valves, recut the seats, resurfaced the cylinder head after cleaning it up and glass beating it. We have gasketed down the cam cap assembly and put the rocker arms after installing the cam. Got this thing all back together. The last part we have left to do is the valve adjustment. So you always want to double check this once it's on the car, but there's a certain clearance that you need between the adjusting screw here and the tip of the valve, right where my finger is, and you'll see a little clear when I put the feeler gauge where it goes. But first step I'm going to do is I'm going to break loose all these adjusting screw lock nuts on both the intake and the exhaust side. And there's a certain specification for the clearance. On the intake, it's 7 to 9, and on the exhaust, it is 9 to 11. So you got an adjusting screw here that you can loosen up. I always put my finger on the nut there just to make sure it doesn't go way far up there. I'll loosen this back until I get some wiggle. Maybe you can hear that, a little wiggle there. That's what I want, so I'm going to loosen all these up to that point. On both the intake and the exhaust. And it's a little bit touchy-feely, but you just want to make sure the feeler gauge will slide in there easily. Got enough clearance on all these. And I'll get my feeler gauge out, and on the exhaust it's 9 to 11, so I'm going to get a 10 thousandths feeler gauge here, and I'm going to tighten that adjusting screw up to it till it's kind of snug against it. Then I'm going to lock that lock nut and then double check it and make sure we're still within range. So there we go. I'm putting the feeler gauge right there. This one should be able to just sit there. And go till it feels a little tight, not too tight. And then I got to hold the screw while I tighten the nut there. I don't want the screw to move because it's already set where I want it. So the goal is just to tighten it up so that adjusting screw doesn't back off. You probably want this pretty snug. I'm sure there's a torque spec for that, but there we go. Now that I got that one set, I'm going to double check it. Make sure that 12 thousandths won't go through it. There's a feeler gauge here, 12 thousandths. So 11 is the top of the spec, and a 12 thousandths should not be able to fit there to be within spec. There we go. Doesn't go. That's what we want. So I'm going to finish doing the 10 thousandths, tightening up the nut on the other 3 valves here, and then we'll move over to the intake side of things. All right. And again, if you're doing this at home or something, you'd want to double check this when you get it on the car, on the engine block. It's a little snug. There we go. Just because there's some flex and some warpage that happens from time to time, that is hard to account for with the cylinder head off of the block. Once you get your head bolts tight, there could be certain things that change. So it's always best just to double check that. And whenever you're dealing with a, adjusting screw setup here, even if you're not doing a full valve job or anything like that, you want to check this clearance before you go back on the car just to make sure there's nothing to be concerned about. Sometimes these valves will tighten up over time, and it'll shrink that clearance to close to 0. I think we have a video where we talked about that on Subaru Turbos. I think it was the DIY video that we were discussing that on. But once your valve gets too tight and your clearance is 0 or negative, your chances of having a misfire are highly likely. Now that I set these 3 up to 10, I'm just going to go through and check them, make sure the 12 thousandths doesn't go. Just to be sure, I'm going to put a 9 thousandths, make sure that one goes. It should, the 10 fit, so there you are. There's the exhaust side set. And then we're going to flip it around, and we're going to do the intake side next. I've already loosened them up. The spec is for this 7 to 9, so we are going to get a 8 thousandths feeler gauge out, middle of the road there, and do that same thing. We're going to get this feeler gauge in between the adjusting screw and the tip of the valve. Snug it up so it just touches there a little tightly. Then we will hold that adjusting screw tight while we tighten the nut. That might be a little tight. We'll see. I go middle of the road so that if you put a little too much pressure on this adjusting screw, and it's smaller than an 8/1000 clearance, you still got 1/1000 below it within range. So your chances of getting it on the first time are a lot better going middle of the road of the spec. Ideally, you'd probably want it at the top of the spec for that wear I talked about. As the valve wears into the head, it tightens up. So if you're at the highest amount of clearance that you can have, it gives it more room to tighten up over time. But I mean, if your valve's tightened up 9/1000 or even 6/1000, you're seeing some pretty good wear. Now I just got this last adjusting screw to set. We'll double check our measurement there, make sure we're within range, and that's all she wrote. So I'm going to get a 7/1000 feeler gauge out, make sure we're sliding through there nice and easy, and we are. Yeah. We'll do a 10/1000 feeler gauge here. It doesn't fit. Alrighty, now that we got our clearance set, we are good to go. This rebuilt head is finished and ready for being put on a car. Anyways, thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell notification button. And yeah, have a great day. Remember, it's all in your head.